General Hospital spoiler for Thursday, January 15th reveal that Jocelyn sat across from Carly in the dim light of the kitchen. They are late enough that the world outside felt suspended, as if Port Charles itself were holding its breath. The silence between them wasn't empty, it throbbed with fear neither of them had been able to outrun. Carly tried to keep her expression steady, but Jocelyn could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled around the mug she wasn't drinking from. Brennan's name hung between them like a shadow that refused to lift. Every move he made had been calculated, every threat controlled, quiet, and devastating. And now, with his attention shifting, with his presence bleeding into corners of their lives they thought were safe, both mother and daughter felt the walls closing in. Jocelyn spoke first, her voice low, trying to sound braver than she felt, admitting she had never sensed danger like this, not even in the worst moments of her past. Brennan wasn't loud. He wasn't careless. He wasn't the kind of enemy who lashed out without thinking. He was the kind who watched, who studied, who placed people exactly where he wanted them before striking. That kind of threat was the most suffocating of all because it made you question every instinct, every step, every sudden noise in the night. Carly tried to reassure her, but the words came out thin, fragile. She confessed she had that same gnawing feeling in her chest, the same instinctive dread that something was building behind the scenes, something Brennan wasn't finished with. She admitted she hated the idea that Jocelyn was part of it, even indirectly. But Brennan didn't need direct lines to pull someone into danger, he only needed leverage. Pressure points, people you cared about, and Jocelyn had always been Carly's greatest weakness. The realization tortured both of them. As they talked, the weight of the truth deepened. Brennan didn't just intend to destroy reputations or force alliances, he wanted psychological control. He wanted fear so profound that it shaped actions before anyone realized. They were reacting to his influence. Jocelyn's voice trembled when she admitted she had been watching her back everywhere she went, convinced each passing figure might be connected to him. Carly's heart twisted. She had seen those changes, but hoped they were temporary. Now she knew they were symptoms of something far more dangerous, an enemy getting too close. Carly leaned in, finally letting her own fear show. She told Jocelyn about the conversations she had overheard, the warnings from people who had every reason to stay silent, but couldn't ignore the danger Brennan represented. Each detail painted a clearer image. Brennan was weaving a net around them, and the tighter it became, the harder it was to see where the next strike might land. Jocelyn asked what they were supposed to do, and Carly had no answer that felt strong enough. She confessed the truth she had held back for days, that Brennan's intentions weren't just professional, strategic, or political. There was something personal in the way he observed people, especially those connected to Jason, those he could manipulate into compliance or break into silence. Carly feared that was why he was circling them now, not because they had done something wrong, but because hurting them would send a message to someone else. That possibility sent a cold shiver through Jocelyn. She felt suddenly small, like she was caught in the middle of a storm she hadn't seen forming. But it also sparked a fierce protectiveness in her, the same resilience she had inherited from Carly, one that refused to be swallowed by fear. Even when fear pressed in on all sides, she told Carly she wouldn't let Brennan dictate her life. But the determination in her voice trembled under the weight of uncertainty. Carly reached for her hand, squeezing it, grounding her. She admitted she wasn't pretending to be fearless anymore. She was terrified. But terror didn't mean surrender. It meant being smart. It meant paying attention. It meant preparing for the moment the enemy moved. They talked in deeper, quieter tones, analyzing Brennan's patterns, the way he applied pressure, the men he used as intermediaries, the silence he left behind after each subtle move. The more they pieced together, the clearer one horrifying truth became. Brennan wasn't just looming over them, he was narrowing in. And he was doing it with a precision that suggested he had already chosen which of them he wanted to break first. Jocelyn felt her breath catch as that reality hit. She wasn't just afraid for herself, she was afraid for her mother. Carly sensed that shift, the way fear stretched between them and reshaped itself into something more protective, more desperate. She pulled Jocelyn closer, not to comfort her, but because she needed the strength too. The kitchen felt smaller, the night heavier, yet their shared fear became a bond. a reminder that neither of them was facing Brennan alone. In that fragile moment, Carly made a promise she wasn't sure she could keep but needed to say out loud. She would not let Brennan destroy their lives. She would not let him touch Jocelyn. She would fight with every breath she had. But as Jocelyn rested her forehead against her mother's shoulder, both of them felt the same truth rising like a cold tide. Brennan was already changing the way they breathed, the way they moved, the way they trusted the world around them. He had become an obsession neither could escape. He had already begun shaping their lives in the darkest ways. And somewhere in the shadows of Port Charles, Brennan was preparing his next move, unaware or perhaps perfectly aware that fear was the weapon working most effectively of all. Emma had always thought desire announced itself loudly through reckless impulses, impulsive touches, or sparks so bright it blinded common sense. But with Joe, it arrived slowly, like a tide rising inch by inch, until she suddenly realized she was already submerged and breathless. Their connection had been growing for weeks, a pull neither of them fully understood, yet neither tried to resist. It lived in the way their conversations lingered long after they ended, in the accidental touches that were never really accidental, in the way silence between them always felt charged rather than empty. Something in the air between them was shifting, and both of them sensed it long before either dared to act on it. That night, everything felt different. Emma found herself hyper-aware of every detail: the low hum of the lamp in Gio's apartment, the rain tapping against the windows, the faint scent of his cologne that always made her pulse quicken. She was trying to stay composed, but her heartbeat was racing in her chest, betraying the storm she carried inside. Joe noticed it too. He watched her with a softness that didn't dim the intensity in his eyes. He had always been calm, grounded, the one who steadied her. But tonight, even he felt the shift, a slow-burning heat building between them until the tension became impossible to ignore. They moved closer without meaning to, their steps quiet but inevitable, drawn to each other as if something in the universe had aligned specifically for this moment. Emma's breath hitched when Joe brushed his fingers lightly along her arm, a touch so gentle it should have calmed her, but instead it sent a ripple of heat through her entire body. She felt her resolve weaken, dissolving under his gaze. Joe hesitated only for a heartbeat, searching her expression, giving her every chance to step away. But Emma wasn't stepping away. She was stepping toward him, into everything she had been trying to hold back. When their lips finally met, it was slow at first, careful, tentative, as though both of them were testing the edges of something dangerous. But the connection ignited instantly, a spark turning into flame, and the caution vanished. Emma wrapped her hands around him as if she had been waiting for this moment, far longer than she realized. Joe pulled her closer with a hunger he had been hiding for too long. The kiss deepened, grew hotter, more urgent, fueled by every unspoken feeling, every suppressed desire, every moment of lingering tension that had been building between them. The world outside faded as they fell into each other. Emma felt Gio's breath warm against her neck, his hands steady on her waist, guiding her backward until the edge of the bed caught behind her knees. She didn't falter, didn't second-guess. For once, she let herself want something without fear or restraint. Gio's control, usually unshakable, slipped as he kissed her again, harder this time, as if he couldn't hold back anymore. He murmured her name against her skin, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing her closer, grounding her even as every part of her felt like it was floating. Their clothes came off in a breathless blur, not frantic, but desperate in a way that felt deeply mutual. Emma felt consumed in the most thrilling way by the intensity of his touch, and the way Gio's restraint melted into raw need. Every movement between them carried a mix of hunger and tenderness, his hands mapping her body as if memorizing every inch. Emma's fingers traced down his chest, her pulse racing as she felt the strength in him, the tension, the careful way he tried to hold himself together even as passion pulled him apart. The room grew warmer, their breaths mixing, their bodies tangled as the gravity between them finally found its release. Emma had never felt like this, like her heart was beating from somewhere outside her chest, like every nerve in her body was alive, electric, burning. Joe moved with a reverence she didn't expect, as if he wasn't just giving in to desire, but honoring something deeper between them. The tenderness in his touch contrasted wildly with the intensity in his eyes, and that combination pushed her over an emotional edge she hadn't prepared for. Every moment between them felt like it was rewriting something: her fears, his walls, their entire understanding of what they meant to each other. The passion was overwhelming, yet grounded in something intimate and real, something that made the room feel both smaller and infinitely vast. When it was over, they didn't separate. They stayed wrapped in each other, breathless, their hearts still racing in the same rhythm. Emma rested her head against Gio's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. Gio's hand stroked her hair gently, his touch suddenly soft again, but still filled with the same intensity that had carried them moments earlier. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them now held something new and understanding, a shift impossible to undo. Emma felt both exhilarated and terrified. She knew this changed everything. This wasn't just heat or impulse. It wasn't a mistake or a moment they could pretend didn't matter. It was the beginning of something deeper, something that could break her open in ways she wasn't sure she could handle. Joe sensed the same. The lines they had been carefully tiptoeing around had disappeared, replaced by a truth neither could escape. Once you crossed this threshold, there was no going back. Emma closed her eyes, breathing in the warmth of him, allowing the reality to settle over her. Their relationship had taken a step that would shape everything to come: dangerous, thrilling, intimate, and undeniably real. And for the first time, she wasn't running from it. She was falling into it. Laura had never imagined she would one day stand between Sonny Corinthos and Kevin Collins, as the only stabilizing force preventing Port Charles from collapsing under the weight of one man's threat. Yet here she was, caught in the center of a storm she did not create, fighting to hold together the fragile pieces of a plan that could either save Ace or destroy everyone involved. The air in her living room felt charged, heavy with tension that clung to the walls like static. Sonny paced like a caged animal, anger radiating from him in waves, each step a reminder that he was a man accustomed to decisive action, not negotiation. Kevin, on the other hand, stood rigid, his jaw tight with fear and barely contained resolve. Laura saw both men's desperation, one driven by instinct, the other by paternal terror, and she knew she had to be the one who kept them from turning their fear into irreversible decisions. The threat of Sidwell loomed over them like a dark shape blocking out the sun. Every day brought new signs that he was closing in, tightening his grip, watching from places they couldn't see but could feel. Laura had watched powerful men before, men who used fear as a weapon, but Sidwell was different. He worked in silence, planting dread like seeds that grew slowly and strangled everything they touched. His obsession had already cut into her life, into Kevin's, into Ace's future. She had no illusions left. Sidwell wasn't going to stop until someone forced him to. But forcing him to stop required precision, unity, and absolute restraint, three things Sonny and Kevin were struggling to maintain. Sonny stopped pacing and faced them both, his voice low but sharp, demanding action, insisting they couldn't wait for Sidwell to make his next move. Laura understood his urgency. Sidwell's presence was a ticking bomb. But she also knew the cost of letting emotion dictate strategy. She had seen Sonny's temper create solutions before, but she had also seen it spark wars. And this wasn't just about territory or power, this was about Ace, an innocent child caught between threats too complex for violence alone to resolve. She quietly reminded Sonny that Sidwell thrived on chaos, that acting too quickly would tip their hand and give Sidwell the advantage he was waiting for. Her words forced him still, not calm, but reflective enough to listen rather than explode. Kevin's voice broke the silence next, raw with the kind of fear only a parent could understand. He insisted they needed a plan to disappear with Ace, to get him out of Port Charles permanently before Sidwell could reach him. Laura's heart twisted hearing the quiver in his tone. Kevin rarely let fear show, but Sidwell had worn down even his strongest defenses. Still, Laura knew running wouldn't work. Sidwell had proven he could track people across borders, across systems, across safe houses and false identities. Escape wasn't a solution, it was postponement. And postponement would only make Sidwell more ruthless. So Laura stood between them, physically and emotionally, and laid out the truth. They needed each other. Kevin needed Sonny's resources. Sonny needed Kevin's insight. and she needed both of them to trust that destroying Sidwell required unity, not reactive chaos. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt the strain of trying to hold together men who were seconds away from fracturing. Once they settled enough to listen, Laura began outlining the skeleton of a plan she had spent nights crafting. She proposed establishing a false trail to convince Sidwell that Ace was being moved, drawing him toward a controlled location. Sonny would oversee the ground logistics with his network, ensuring no unexpected interference. Kevin would continue playing the concerned, frightened parent because Sidwell expected that behavior, and predictable emotion would keep him from realizing the real strategy unfolding beneath the surface. And Laura herself would position as the bridge, the negotiator, the one Sidwell assumed would crumble under psychological pressure. Instead, she planned to be the fuse that ignited the trap. The plan was dangerous, imperfect, and fraught with opportunities for Sidwell to twist the situation. Sonny pointed out the risks immediately, his tone clipped and distrustful. Kevin countered with worries about Ace's safety, about the trauma the child had already endured. Laura absorbed both arguments, weighing them against the harsh truth she had already accepted. Doing nothing was more dangerous than any plan they could create. Sidwell was coming whether they acted or not. The only question was whether they would be prepared. As they continued debating, Lauren noticed something shift very subtly between Sonny and Kevin. The hostility didn't disappear, but it softened into begrudging respect as they recognized that each man's love and fear were rooted in the same core truth. Ace deserved a future that wasn't ruled by Sidwell's shadow. And Laura realized that this fragile alliance, this uncertain collaboration, might be their only real weapon against Sidwell's cruelty. But beneath all the strategy, all the planning, Laura felt a deeper dread slowly weaving itself into her thoughts. Sidwell was unpredictable. He was intelligent. He was 3 steps ahead of everyone, even on his worst day. And his fixation on Ace and the Collins family was becoming more unstable. Every instinct Laura had warned her that they were preparing for a threat far more personal than any of them wanted to admit. As the meeting drew to a close and Sonny left with a begrudging promise to stay coordinated, Laura remained sitting with Kevin, her hand in his, both of them silent as the weight of what they must do settled heavily between them. She felt the tremor in his fingertips, the fear he couldn't speak aloud. She squeezed his hand, trying to anchor him and herself. They were stepping into a war they didn't fully understand, against a man who thrived on breaking the strongest minds. But Laura had made her choice. She would protect Ace. She would not let Sidwell dismantle her family piece by piece. And if that meant standing between Sonny and Kevin, if it meant orchestrating the most dangerous plan of her life, she would do it without hesitation. Because Sidwell had already taken enough. And Laura Baldwin Collins was done being afraid. Brooke Lynn had always been fierce. But tonight there was a sharper edge to her resolve, a protective fire that rose the moment she saw Tracy zero in on Chase with that cold, strategic glare she reserved for people she intended to break. The tension in the Quartermain house was palpable, thick enough that even the air felt difficult to breathe. Tracy stood with her arms folded, already launching into another cutting tirade about loyalty, responsibility, and the future of the family legacy. Her words aimed directly at Chase like arrows dipped in venom. Chase tried to stay composed, answering calmly, refusing to rise to the bait. But Brooke Lynn could see the strain in his eyes. He had been under so much pressure lately. Turner's scrutiny, the weight of possibly returning to the PCPD, the echoes of every trauma he thought he had buried. Dan Tracy's attack was the final blow. He didn't need. Before Chase could say a word in his own defense, Brooke Lynn stepped between them with a force that startled even Tracy. Her voice rose, sharp and unwavering, slicing through the tension as she demanded Tracy back off. She spoke with a conviction that shook the room, telling her grandmother that Chase had sacrificed enough, that his loyalty had been unquestionable, and that he deserved support, not constant interrogation. Tracy's eyes widened, stunned by the defiance, but Brooke Lynn didn't falter. She knew exactly what Chase was feeling, the silent weight pressing on him, the fear that one wrong move could unravel everything he'd rebuilt. And she refused to let anyone, especially her own family, add to that burden. Tracy tried to argue back, insisting she only wanted what was best for the family. But Brooke Lynn pushed harder. She revealed what Tracy hadn't considered. Chase was at a crossroads, battling internal doubts, haunted by possibilities he wasn't ready to say aloud. He needed space, understanding, and stability, not judgment. Brooke Lynn's voice softened, but her determination didn't fade. She spoke of everything Chase had done for her, every moment he had stood by her when she was lost, struggling, or overwhelmed. Now it was her turn to protect him, even if it meant challenging the woman who controlled half the Quartermain world. Chase watched, overwhelmed by the intensity of her defense. He felt something shift inside him, gratitude, love, and a deep sense of safety he hadn't realized he'd been craving. Brooke Lynn wasn't just speaking for him, she was fighting for him, guarding him against a force he could never confront alone. It was a reminder that he wasn't facing these changes or pressures by himself. Someone was standing with him, shielding him, pushing back the storm one fierce word at a time. Tracy eventually retreated, not defeated but forced to reconsider, her expression unreadable as she left the room. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Brooke Lynn turned to Chase, her face softening instantly, all the fire melting into tenderness. Chase felt breathless as he looked at her, understanding that this moment had altered something between them. Her protection wasn't impulse, it was commitment. It was love manifesting in the most powerful way she knew. And as Chase took her hand, feeling an unfamiliar sense of calm wash over him, he realized that this confrontation had done more than silence Tracy. It had marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, a chapter built on strength, unity, and a bond deep enough to withstand every challenge waiting ahead. Jason didn't plan it as a date, but the moment he picked Britt up and told her he wanted to take her somewhere quiet, something shifted between them, subtle, undeniable, electric. They didn't talk much on the way, but they didn't need to. The silence wasn't distance, it was anticipation. Britt kept stealing glances at him, feeling that strange chemistry simmering higher than it had in months. Something raw and unspoken pulling them closer with every mile. When they finally reached the cliffside overlooking Port Charles, the city lights stretching beneath them like scattered stars, Britt felt her breath catch. This wasn't casual. This wasn't friendly. This was Jason choosing to let her into a part of his world few ever saw. They stood side by side, the night wind brushing against them, and Jason's usual stoic calm softened. He talked in a way he rarely allowed himself to. Britt listened, equally surprised and moved, feeling the walls between them thinning moment by moment. Every stolen glance, every quiet smile, every shift in their stance brought them a little closer until the tension between them became impossible to ignore. Britt felt her pulse racing, realizing Jason wasn't just letting her in emotionally. He was allowing himself to feel something he had tried to avoid. When Jason finally reached for her hand, the contact was small but explosive, sending a surge of heat through both of them. Britt stepped closer, drawn toward him by instinct, by longing, by the unmistakable truth neither could deny anymore. Their connection, once uncertain, once burdened by danger and hesitation, was now catching fire. This night, this moment, wasn't simply an outing. It was a turning point, a shift powerful enough that Jason couldn't hide it, and Britt couldn't pretend she didn't feel it. What began as a quiet escape became the spark that proved their relationship was no longer simmering. It was igniting into something neither of them could stop.